The scent of lavender cleaner still lingered as I stepped through my own front door, 3 days earlier than the son and daughter-in-law I trusted ever expected. Still, I unzipped my coat with steady hands, watching Lauren's heels on my rug, Nathan's laughter echoing from the kitchen. As that familiar floral smell wrapped around their voices, it turned sharp, like civility masking a theft. While their comfort unfolded room by room, I saw how easily they'd mistaken absence for permission. The same house I built from sacrifice now sat claimed by convenience. That's when I knew. I didn't leave to rest. I left to confirm betrayal. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The morning sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of Eleanor Parker's kitchen, a warm savanna glow touching the edges of her worn oak table. She stirred her coffee slowly, watching the cream spiral like a secret she wasn't ready to share. On the counter, her suitcase sat open, neat, deliberate, and lighter than anyone in her family would expect for a week-long trip. "I've decided to take a little rest," she said, her voice steady, almost casual. "A short trip down to the coast. Maybe Tybee Island or somewhere quiet." Across the table, Nathan looked up from his phone. His brow creased, not out of concern but calculation. Beside him, Lauren's perfectly manicured hand froze midair, a spoon clinking softly against porcelain. The brief exchange between them, a glance, a smirk, a twitch of shared understanding, wasn't lost on Eleanor. "Oh, that's wonderful, Mom," Lauren said, layering sugar onto her tone. "You've been talking about needing a break for ages." Nathan nodded absently. "Yeah, you deserve it." He didn't look at her when he said it. Eleanor smiled faintly, pressing her hand to the cool ceramic of her mug. "I'll leave this afternoon. Don't bother picking me up when I return. I'll call a cab." Lauren's smile flickered. "Of course." Silence stretched thin between them. Somewhere outside, cicadas buzzed in the oak trees, loud enough to fill the space Nathan didn't know how to. Eleanor could almost hear his unspoken relief. When they left for the day, Nathan to his office downtown, Lauren to her boutique errands, Eleanor exhaled and reached for her phone. A new message blinked from Patricia Green. "Pat. Perfect time to observe." Eleanor's lips curved into a knowing smile. Pat always had a knack for reading situations like chessboards. Eleanor typed back, "Everything is in motion. Let's keep it quiet for now." She moved with quiet efficiency. In the den, she checked the small silver camera tucked into the bookshelf's corner, still working. Upstairs, she replaced the batteries in the motion sensor by the stairwell. Just a precaution, she told herself, though she already knew it wasn't. In her study, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a slim folder labeled "Household and Estate Active." Inside, carefully arranged, were copies of deeds, trust forms, and Victor Lane's recent legal correspondence. Eleanor traced her finger over the embossed seal. Everything she'd built, this home, the savings, the small investments she'd nurtured through 40 years of teaching, was protected. She'd made sure of it. But protection wasn't the same as trust. And that line had blurred months ago when she'd caught a hint of entitlement in her son's voice, a quiet presumption in Lauren's laughter. She closed the folder and slid it into the hidden compartment beneath the false bottom of her filing cabinet. By noon, her suitcase was zipped, the house spotless, and a soft breeze carried the faint scent of gardenias through the open back door. She took one last walk through each room, noting everything. The arrangement of frames on the mantel, the placement of her reading glasses, the subtle alignment of the dining chairs. These were her control points. Markers she would remember when she came back. At the doorway, she paused. From her purse, she removed a small notepad and wrote 2 lines. "Observation begins now. No interference until return." She placed the note beneath the ceramic bowl on the hall table, her own secret ritual, a quiet signature only she understood. Her cab arrived exactly at 1. The driver, a kind man with salt and pepper hair, loaded her suitcase into the trunk. As they pulled away, Eleanor looked back at the house, the broad porch, the hanging fern swaying gently in the afternoon air. To anyone else, it looked peaceful, unremarkable. To her, it was a stage that had been reset. The ride to the airport passed in a blur of magnolia trees and distant thunderclouds. Eleanor kept her phone in her lap, unread messages lighting the screen. Pat had sent another text. Remember, patience is the sharpest blade. Eleanor smiled to herself. Pat was right. She wasn't leaving to rest. She was leaving to learn. As the taxi merged onto the highway, Eleanor glanced out the window, the horizon ahead glowing gold and uncertain. In her reflection on the glass, she saw the faintest glimmer of a woman who'd stopped accepting illusions long ago. By the time the plane's wheels lifted off Savannah's soil, Eleanor Parker had already begun her quiet operation. One built not on confrontation, but on observation. By the time Eleanor's plane cut through the clouds above Savannah, the Parker house had already begun to shift. Nathan stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, studying the wide expanse of polished hardwood like a man appraising his future. The faint smell of Eleanor's lavender cleaner still hung in the air, clinging to the drapes and rugs. It was her scent, controlled, constant, unmistakably hers, and he found it oddly irritating. "She won't be back for at least a week," Lauren said, stepping out of her heels and padding across the floor. "Maybe longer. You know how she is once she gets comfortable somewhere. She could stay longer if it suits her." Nathan's mouth curved faintly. "Wouldn't bother me." She opened one of the hall closets, pulling out an extra throw blanket and tossing it over the back of the couch. "This place could use a refresh anyway," she murmured. "It's been stuck in her teacher decor mode for decades." Nathan didn't disagree. "We could move some of the furniture, make it more livable." Within the hour, the sound of scraping wood filled the house. Chairs shifted. Picture frames came down. The framed quote above the fireplace, "Discipline is the foundation of freedom," landed in a cardboard box. Lauren hummed as she replaced it with an abstract canvas she'd found in storage, something she'd always said opened up the space. "Better already," she said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. But in the quiet corner of the den, behind a row of hardcover books, a tiny lens captured everything. Lauren's easy confidence, Nathan's detached smirk, the subtle conquest in their movements. The feed streamed silently to Eleanor's tablet, resting on the tray table of seat 14A, 30,000 feet in the air. Eleanor didn't smile as she watched. She simply noted the time, 1:42 p.m., and began a fresh page in her travel notebook. 1:42 p.m. Nathan and Lauren begin rearranging living room. Intentions. Ownership, not maintenance. Across the aisle, a flight attendant offered her a drink. "Water's fine, thank you," Eleanor said, eyes never leaving the screen. Her pen moved steadily. She wasn't angry. Anger had always clouded judgment. What she felt was precision. Later that evening, in Savannah, Lauren leaned on the kitchen counter, scrolling through Eleanor's neatly labeled spice rack. "We could clear some of this out," she said, tapping at the little glass jars. "She won't even notice half of it missing." "Let's not overdo it," Nathan muttered. But he didn't stop her. Outside, a soft knock came at the side gate. Mrs. Chambers, their next-door neighbor, waved politely through the slats. "Everything all right with your mother?" she asked. "She's fine," Lauren called back, sweet as syrup. "Just taking a little vacation." Eleanor's camera caught the exchange, the lazy wave, the dismissive tone. Later that night, Pat received the update through their private thread. "Pat, keep noting everything. Small actions reveal big intentions. Eleanor. Already begun. They're getting comfortable too quickly. Meanwhile, Sophie Kim sat at her desk at First Georgia Trust, a stack of ledgers open before her. She'd received Eleanor's authorization earlier that morning and now monitored each account with careful attention. No transfers, no changes, but she set an alert for any attempted access. "Let them try," she whispered. By the third day, the house no longer carried Eleanor's order. Shoes by the door, a wine glass left half full on the mantel, music playing loud enough to echo upstairs. Lauren stretched on the couch one night, draped in Eleanor's throw blanket, her voice lazy. "You know, once she passes, this place will technically be ours. We might as well start making it feel like it." Nathan hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the hallway where his mother's old photographs still hung. "Don't talk like that." Lauren rolled her eyes. "I'm just being practical." But Nathan didn't respond. His reflection in the darkened window looked older than he felt. Guilty, maybe, or uncertain. He turned off the light and left the room. Miles away, Eleanor sat in her quiet hotel suite, the glow of her tablet reflecting in her glasses. She sipped tea, took another note, and opened the encrypted folder Victor Lane had helped her prepare. Documentation proving every asset, every account, every clause that insulated her from their reach. She whispered softly to herself, the words steady, deliberate. "You can move my furniture, but not my foundation." Her phone buzzed. Another message from Pat. "Pat, Savannah's quiet tonight. They're showing their true rhythm now." "Eleanor. Good. Let them dance. I'll know every step." She turned off the light and let the darkness settle around her, the sound of distant waves brushing the glass. Somewhere back home, a camera blinked once, recording Lauren laughing too loudly, Nathan drinking in silence, the echo of disrespect growing louder in a house that no longer felt theirs. By the fourth morning, the Parker house no longer looked like Eleanor Parker's home. It looked like a showroom for someone else's life. Eleanor watched from her hotel suite in Tybee, tablet balanced against her knees, a cup of black coffee cooling beside her. The camera feeds showed new cushions on the couch, different flowers on the dining table, gaudy lilies instead of her soft hydrangeas. Her framed photos had been replaced with glossy prints of oceans and skylines, sterile and impersonal. It wasn't the change itself that stung, it was the ease with which it had been done. She clicked over to another feed, the one in her study. Lauren stood at her desk, rifling through papers with the carefulness of someone trying not to get caught. "She really keeps everything organized," Lauren said, half laughing. "All her old account statements are still printed. Who does that anymore?" Nathan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "That's how she is. Always needed things to feel controlled. If she'd just trusted us." Lauren finished for him, her tone sharp but teasing. "Come on, Nathan. You're her only child. It's not like she's giving it all to charity." He didn't respond. The silence that followed was thicker than argument, weighted with a truth neither wanted to say aloud. Eleanor paused the feed, studying their expressions frame by frame. Nathan's hesitation, Lauren's ease. The dynamic was shifting. She could feel it even through the cold glow of the screen. Her phone buzzed. "Pat. You seeing what I'm seeing?" "Eleanor. They're getting careless." "Pat. Exactly. People who think they're safe stop whispering." Eleanor allowed herself a long breath. She turned to her notebook and began a new list. Dates, times, words. A teacher's discipline had always been her weapon. Observation was her method. By afternoon, a notification pinged on her secondary phone, one she used only for encrypted alerts. A small anomaly, $712 withdrawn from a joint expense card Eleanor had authorized years ago for grocery and maintenance use. Sophie's name flashed on the screen. Sophie. Saw something odd. Purchase at a home decor boutique under Nathan's card. Want me to flag it? Eleanor. Not yet. Let's document first. We'll need patterns, not one mistake. Eleanor stared out the hotel window, the distant Atlantic glinting under a gray sky. Patterns, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone, always patterns. Back at the Parker house, Nathan and Lauren sat at the kitchen island, 2 glasses of Chardonnay between them, the late sun spilling gold across the counter. I checked Mom's old will draft, Nathan said quietly. It names me executor. Nothing about any trust changes. Lauren raised an eyebrow. So we're fine, right? I guess, he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. She tilted her head. You guess? Victor Lane's been around more lately, Nathan said. She mentioned updating paperwork a few months ago. I didn't ask what. Lauren's smile faltered. You should've. They fell silent again, the ticking wall clock filling the space with metronomic judgment. Across town, Victor Lane sat in his office, a stack of sealed envelopes beside him, each marked with Eleanor's initials. His assistant peeked in. You wanted me to confirm the holding structure on the Parker Trust? Yes, he said, scanning the document. His brow furrowed. And ensure that no secondary signatories were added. Mrs. Parker was clear. Exclusive access. Any deviation, we notify her directly. As he signed the authorization, his phone chimed. A message from Eleanor. Victor, stay ready. They're testing the fence. He replied simply. Fence is electric, Eleanor. They'll learn fast. That night, Eleanor sat at her desk by the window, pen gliding across paper as the sky darkened into indigo. The page before her was a lattice of timestamps and observations. No emotion, no speculation, just data. Tuesday, 7:15 p.m. Lauren discussing estate. Tone, presumptive. Wednesday, 1:04 p.m. Joint card used for personal purchase. Logged. Thursday, 9:45 p.m. Nathan uncertain. Possible hesitation or guilt. Pat called just after 10. You sound calm, she said. I am, Eleanor replied. Calm is the difference between losing control and documenting it. Pat laughed softly. That's why I never bet against you. Eleanor smiled faintly. The cameras flickered, Lauren's laughter echoing faintly through the audio feed. Somewhere beneath that sound was the ticking of a trap slowly tightening. She closed her notebook and powered off the tablet. Keep showing me your truth, she whispered into the quiet. I'll show you mine soon enough. The Parker house looked different from the curb. Eleanor could tell before she even stepped out of the cab. The porch light had been replaced with a brighter, colder bulb. One of the flower pots she'd kept by the steps now sat cracked near the gutter. Even the curtains, her soft linen ones, were drawn halfway, uneven, as if the house itself had grown careless. She waited until the cab pulled away before crossing the street. The November air had turned sharp, the kind that made the Spanish moss along the oak branches sway like whispers. From across the yard, she watched faint movement through the living room window. Nathan and Lauren, her son and his wife, were there, voices rising and falling in careless comfort. Eleanor adjusted her coat collar. Her eyes cool but unreadable. She wasn't ready to announce her return. Not yet. Observation, as Pat always said, was most honest when it was silent. From her purse, Eleanor drew her phone and opened the security app. Every camera feed flickered alive, each one with timestamps that matched her earlier logs. They hadn't noticed a thing. A quiet satisfaction warmed her chest. Inside, Nathan poured himself a drink, the familiar clink of ice against glass echoing through the living room. She's not even back yet, and I already feel lighter, he said, half laughing. Lauren lounged across the couch, scrolling on her tablet. I told you, once she's out of sight, the place just feels freer, like we can finally breathe. Nathan's shoulders stiffened slightly. Careful, Lauren, she smirked. What? I didn't say anything untrue. Eleanor's gaze didn't waver as she watched through the narrow crack in the curtains. The easy familiarity of their betrayal didn't sting. It clarified. This wasn't ignorance, it was assumption. A soft vibration buzzed in her coat pocket. A message from Pat. You're early. Good. They won't expect a thing. Eleanor typed back. They've redecorated arrogance. It suits them. Minutes later, headlights swept the driveway. Pat's beige sedan. Eleanor waited until her friend parked down the street and joined her beneath the shadow of the oak tree. God, Ellie, Pat whispered, pulling her scarf tighter. You'd think they were auditioning for a home invasion show. I've been watching the footage you sent. You ready to make this official? Not yet, Eleanor murmured. I want the full picture before I open my mouth. Pat handed her a small manila envelope. Here's the compiled notes, dates, spending patterns, and Sophie's report. Everything's cross-checked. You've got a full behavioral profile of both of them. Eleanor slipped the envelope into her bag, her expression composed, the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. Victor said he'd call tonight. He did, Pat confirmed. He's already reviewed the trust. You can take legal action anytime, estate, property, assets, whatever they think they've touched. From inside the house came the muffled sound of laughter. Lauren's voice carried above the rest. I swear, once she's gone, I'm gutting that kitchen. I've already picked out the tiles. Pat's mouth tightened. You want me to record this? No, Eleanor said softly. Let them speak freely. The truth sounds better unprompted. A motion near the front window drew their attention. Nathan was walking toward the porch, phone pressed to his ear. He stepped out into the cold air, muttering something about the will paperwork and timing. Eleanor's hand rested at her side, still as glass. He's nervous, Pat noted quietly. Good, Eleanor replied. That means the conscience is still alive. Maybe that's what I'll appeal to first. They waited until Nathan retreated inside. Pat exhaled slowly. So what's next? You going to walk in there tonight? Not yet. Eleanor's voice was steady. You don't interrupt a performance mid-scene. You wait for the applause line. Her phone lit up again. This time, Victor Lane's name appeared. She answered, voice low. Eleanor, Victor said, calm but clipped. Everything's ready. Their access attempts were logged but denied. You're protected. If you want to move, financially or legally, you can do it now. Not yet, she repeated. I don't just want them stopped. I want them seen. Victor paused. You've always had a teacher's instinct for lessons. Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. And they're overdue for one. She hung up and tucked the phone away. Pat looked at her with a kind of reverence, the same look she'd given Eleanor decades ago when she'd outmaneuvered a corrupt school board without ever raising her voice. You're terrifying when you're calm, Pat said. I know, Eleanor replied. A car passed, its headlights sweeping over the two women before disappearing down the quiet Savannah street. Inside the house, Nathan turned off the lights, unaware of the eyes watching from the shadows beyond the lawn. Eleanor's voice barely rose above a whisper. Let them think I'm still gone. The morning broke gray over Savannah, heavy clouds pressing low enough to touch the rooftops. Eleanor stood across the street from her own house, the air damp with the smell of rain. She waited, watching through the narrow frame of the kitchen window as Lauren moved carelessly through her cabinets, humming to herself while pouring cereal into a porcelain bowl Eleanor had bought on a teacher's salary 40 years ago. The sight wasn't rage-inducing, it was clarifying. The line between ownership and assumption had been crossed so completely that there was no longer a question of intent. Lauren wasn't borrowing comfort, she was claiming territory. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels clicking softly against the walkway. Pat followed a few paces behind. Her scarf pulled tight against the wind, "You're sure about this?" she whispered. Eleanor's reply was measured. "They've already shown who they are. Now I'll show them who I've always been." She slid her key into the lock and turned it with quiet precision. The front door opened without protest. Inside, the scent was wrong. Candle wax mixed with some synthetic air freshener, something called island driftwood. The old furniture had been rearranged. The family photos were gone, replaced with generic prints. Eleanor's books, once organized alphabetically by author, had been pushed into haphazard piles to make space for Lauren's design magazines. Pat lingered in the entryway, phone in hand, the camera discreetly recording. "God, Ellie," she murmured. "They didn't even try to hide it." Eleanor walked slowly through each room, her fingers trailing along surfaces that had once carried the pulse of her daily life. In the dining room, the antique chest she'd inherited from her grandmother stood half open, silk linens replaced by a stack of Lauren's luxury shopping bags. In the corner, the security camera's tiny light blinked, a loyal witness. Eleanor glanced up, then down at her watch. "Timestamp that," she said softly. Pat tapped her phone. "Documented." From somewhere upstairs came the faint sound of a hairdryer. Lauren's voice followed, calling out over the noise. "Nathan, did you move my makeup bag?" Eleanor's eyes flicked toward the staircase. "They still think I'm gone." "Then make that work for you," Pat whispered. Eleanor nodded once. She moved through the living room, stopping by the mantel where her framed family portrait had once stood. The frame was gone, but the faint outline on the wallpaper remained, a ghost of the original. She took a photo. Her phone buzzed. A text from Victor Lane. "Victor. Received confirmation from Sophie. Financials untouched. Their attempts flagged and blocked. Everything remains under your control. Eleanor. Understood. Begin recording formal chain of custody for all accounts." Victor replied within moments. "Consider it done. You have full leverage, Eleanor. No one else knows that yet. Use that silence wisely." Lauren appeared at the top of the stairs, robe tied, hair half dried. For a moment she didn't see Eleanor standing by the fireplace. Her voice carried lazily through the air. "Nathan, do you think your mom would notice if we had the locks changed? It'd make sense to have new ones, especially if—" Her words stopped mid-sentence. The air seemed to thicken as she saw Eleanor, composed still, framed against the morning light streaming through the window. "Lauren." Eleanor's tone was not harsh, not raised. It was colder than either. "I'd notice everything." Lauren froze. The color drained from her face. You're back early." "Evidently." Eleanor's eyes flicked to the altered decor, the boxes near the couch, the rearranged furniture. "I thought I'd rest here, since it seems I've been replaced in my own home." Pat stepped forward, her phone still recording. "Morning, Lauren." Nathan entered from the kitchen, a glass in hand. When he saw his mother, his grip tightened. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered across the tile. "Mom." His voice cracked, the sound of a man caught mid-lie. "I thought you were gone longer?" Eleanor's expression didn't change. "So did I." The silence that followed was punctuated only by the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew a thin folder, setting it carefully on the counter. "This," she said evenly, "is every documented transaction, every change, every attempt to access my estate while I was away. I assume you have explanations." Lauren's eyes darted to Nathan. He said nothing. Pat folded her arms. "You might want to come up with them fast." Eleanor turned toward the window where the rain had begun to fall, soft, deliberate drops against the glass. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from Victor. "Victor, All legal authorizations in your favor. You can initiate the transfer of authority anytime. Recommend discretion until you're ready for exposure. Eleanor typed a single response. Thank you. The lesson begins today. Then she looked back at Nathan and Lauren, her face unreadable. You've both been so very comfortable. That ends now. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the house seemed to still itself. Pat's recording light blinked red in the background, the only movement in the room. Eleanor's gaze softened just slightly, as though pity had crossed her mind and been dismissed just as quickly. Then, almost imperceptibly, she smiled. A calm, knowing, devastating smile. The rain lingered through the night, soft and steady, a rhythmic pulse against the windows that reminded Eleanor of old classroom days. Stormy afternoons when the world went quiet enough to think clearly. By morning, the Parker house carried that same hush, the kind that followed an unexpected shift in authority. Eleanor sat at the dining table, the same spot where she'd once graded essays and balanced her checkbook. Her laptop screen glowed pale blue, rows of figures scrolling upward, each line a record of control reclaimed. She sipped her tea slowly, unhurried, letting the faint scent of chamomile fill the silence. Pat stood near the window, arms folded. You slept? She asked. Eleanor didn't look up. I rested. There's a difference. Down the hall, faint whispers carried from the kitchen, Nathan and Lauren's voices, hushed and anxious. The calm after confrontation had fractured into strategy. Eleanor could hear it in the tremor beneath their words. I told you not to use that card, Nathan muttered. Lauren's reply was sharp, low. I didn't think she'd notice. She notices everything, Nathan said bitterly. She's got Victor and that bank woman on her side. If she checks, she already has, Eleanor said from the doorway. Both froze. Nathan's face blanched. Lauren's hand dropped from the counter. Eleanor stepped forward, laptop in hand, the quiet power of someone who had already won. Sit, she said simply. They obeyed. She placed the laptop on the table, spinning it so they could see. Every account, every joint card, every recorded transaction for the past 6 months, she said evenly. All verified by Sophie Kim at First Georgia Trust. Every unauthorized attempt denied. Every irregular purchase flagged. Lauren tried for composure. We didn't mean intent, Eleanor interrupted, is what you think you have until evidence disagrees. Pat gave a small approving hum from behind her. Eleanor clicked a tab on the screen. A graph appeared, clean blue bars marking every transaction. You see this? This is precision. Protection layered into the trust by Victor Lane himself. You couldn't touch a penny if you tried. Nathan rubbed a hand over his jaw. We weren't stealing, he muttered. No, Eleanor said, her tone sharp as glass. You were assuming. Silence spread across the kitchen. The rain had stopped, but the sound of dripping water from the porch gutter punctuated each word. Pat walked over and placed a single folder on the counter. Here's the paper record, she said. Victor wanted you to have it for peace of mind. Eleanor opened it briefly. Legal confirmation of ownership, every clause reaffirmed, every safeguard permanent. She ran her hand over the embossed seal. Peace of mind, she repeated softly. Yes, I think I've earned that. Lauren's lip trembled as she leaned forward. We thought you needed help with everything. The finances, the house. Eleanor's eyes flicked up, cutting through her defense. Help is given, Lauren, not taken. Nathan sank back in his chair, staring at the laptop screen, the reality settling over him like cold rain. So, everything's locked? Victor's voice answered before Eleanor could. His name flashed on her phone screen. She put the call on speaker. Eleanor, he said, his tone crisp, professional. I wanted to confirm personally. The trust structure has been finalized, permanent protections across all assets. Their access attempts were nullified. Even I can't alter them without your direct approval. Thank you, Victor, Eleanor said. Nathan's head dropped into his hands. Permanent? He murmured. Permanent, Victor confirmed. And Eleanor, Sophie's run the financial integrity check. No damage done. Everything remains yours, and hers team caught their attempts in real time. She said she'll send over the formal documentation today. Pat couldn't help but smile. Seems like the universe is catching up to your lesson plan, Ellie. Eleanor ended the call and looked back at her son. Nathan, I taught students for 40 years. Do you know what I learned? He didn't answer. That the hardest lesson isn't punishment, it's accountability. Nathan didn't meet her eyes. Lauren fidgeted with her ring, her expression collapsing from arrogance to embarrassment. Eleanor closed the laptop, the soft click echoing like a period at the end of a long, deliberate sentence. From now on, this house runs on honesty. If that's too heavy a burden, you're free to find another roof. Pat stepped forward, resting a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. You really don't miss a thing, do you? Eleanor gave a faint smile. Observation, my dear, is just another form of respect. The clock ticked quietly in the corner as Nathan and Lauren sat frozen, realizing that the world they'd begun to reshape had been built on sand. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the porch in soft gold. Eleanor rose, gathering the folder and her laptop, and walked toward the window. It's strange, she said softly, how power shifts without a sound. You just wake up one morning and realize who was in control all along. The Saturday air was bright but brittle, the kind of Savannah morning that looked beautiful until you felt the bite of the wind. Eleanor Parker stood in her kitchen, calm in a navy blouse and pearl earrings, arranging pastries on the silver tray she'd inherited from her mother. Every motion was deliberate, every gesture a rehearsal for control. The dining room buzzed with low conversation. The family gathering had been Nathan's idea, an attempt, perhaps, to normalize what could no longer be undone. Just brunch, he'd said, the morning after their failed cover-up. To clear the air. Eleanor had agreed with a simple nod, the kind that meant she already knew how it would end. Pat arrived first, sharp in a tailored coat, her eyes scanning the scene like a field operative. You look composed, she murmured. I am composed, Eleanor said. Composure is contagious. By the time the guests began filtering in, neighbors, extended family, a few colleagues who'd known Eleanor from her teaching days, the house had reclaimed a kind of false warmth. Laughter floated lightly, though too rehearsed to be real. Nathan and Lauren hovered near the coffee station, greeting guests with smiles that didn't quite meet their eyes. Lauren's laugh pitched too high. Nathan's charm felt paper-thin. From the corner, Pat watched them closely, jotting quiet notes in her small leather book. Tone, posture, hesitation. When Victor Lane arrived, the atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. The estate attorney had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, it commanded it. His charcoal suit was immaculate, his expression unreadable. He greeted Eleanor with professional courtesy, but addressed her as Mrs. Parker, the title a subtle declaration of allegiance. Lauren stiffened when she saw him. I didn't realize this was a business brunch, she said lightly, voice catching. Victor smiled politely. I'm here as a friend of the family. Mrs. Parker and I happen to discuss estate matters on weekends. Eleanor turned from the sideboard, teacup steady in hand. Estate matters do have a way of overlapping with family matters, don't they? The hum of conversation dimmed. Guests exchanged polite but curious glances. Pat leaned toward Victor. Here it comes, she whispered. Eleanor set her cup down and took her place at the head of the table. I wanted to thank everyone for coming, she began, voice poised and even. It's been a trying few weeks, but sometimes discomfort is a necessary teacher. Nathan's fingers drummed nervously against his glass. Mom, maybe this isn't the time? Eleanor interrupted softly. I assure you, Nathan, time has never been more appropriate. The guests went still. Eleanor's gaze swept the table. Family, she said, isn't a matter of proximity. It's a matter of respect. And respect, once mishandled, rarely returns without consequence. Lauren shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor, if this is about the... Please, Eleanor said, her tone firm but graceful. Let me finish. She reached into her folder and laid a single sheet on the table, an official document stamped and signed. This, she said, is confirmation that all estate assets, including this home, remain under my exclusive control. They were never at risk, no matter what anyone might have assumed. A faint murmur rippled through the room. Nathan's face went pale. Lauren's eyes darted toward the window, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Pat's pen paused mid-sentence. She didn't need notes for this. Eleanor continued. In recent weeks, I've learned that silence can be mistaken for weakness. I've also learned that weakness, properly managed, can be the most powerful weapon in the room. Victor leaned slightly forward, voice steady. For full transparency, I can confirm Mrs. Parker's statement. All legal documents have been reviewed and finalized. Any future changes will require her explicit consent. No one else holds authority. Guests exchanged quiet looks, some impressed, others unsettled. The balance of power was visible now, undeniable. Nathan cleared his throat. You didn't have to. I did, Eleanor cut in. Because when someone tries to erase your boundaries, you don't argue. You rewrite the rules. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the mantel clock. The weight of her calm pressed on everyone present, a quiet gravity that needed no shouting to be felt. Pat watched Lauren's posture collapse, her confident frame shrinking under invisible pressure. She jotted one last note in her book. Humiliation accepted. Lesson underway. Eleanor lifted her teacup again, eyes serene. Now, she said, I believe we were discussing gratitude. Nathan, would you like to share what you're thankful for this year? He stared down at his untouched plate. For clarity, he muttered finally. Good answer, she said, setting her cup down with a soft clink. The guests exhaled, conversation awkwardly resuming. Victor leaned toward her and whispered, Perfect timing. You just made them accountable. In public. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on her son and daughter-in-law. Accountability, she murmured, belongs where the audience can see it. The brunch that began with nervous smiles ended in the kind of silence that only truth could make. The clink of silverware had faded. Even the laughter outside the open window, children playing down the street, felt distant, irrelevant. Eleanor Parker stood at the head of her dining table, composed as marble, the faint afternoon light catching the silver in her hair. Her presence filled the room so completely that no one dared move until she did. When she finally spoke, her tone was almost gentle. Almost. There's something I'd like to share with all of you, she said, glancing briefly at Victor. Since we're speaking about gratitude, I think it's only fair to express mine, in writing. Pat's eyes flicked to the leather portfolio resting on the buffet. She knew what was coming. She'd helped Eleanor prepare it. Eleanor opened the portfolio and began removing documents, one by one, each sealed, stamped, and tabbed with Victor's neat handwriting. She laid them across the table like a magician revealing the final act of a trick already won. The guests leaned forward. Nathan's jaw tightened. Lauren's hands twitched beneath the tablecloth. These, Eleanor said evenly, are the finalized trust documents, signed 3 months ago. The home, the savings, the remaining teaching pension, all transferred into a private trust under my sole discretion. She paused, looking directly at Lauren. Irrevocable. Lauren's voice cracked. You did that before you even left? Eleanor's smile didn't waver. I believe in preparing for every lesson before it begins. Nathan leaned forward, a hollow laugh breaking from him. So this trip, this act, it was all part of your test? No, she said. It was part of my confirmation. The air grew heavy again, dense with realization. Around the table the guests whispered, soft, shocked murmurs rippling like wind through leaves. She moved everything? Already done? My God. Eleanor took the next document and slid it toward Victor. Victor, if you would? He adjusted his glasses, scanning the first page. This, he said, his tone calm but decisive, confirms Mrs. Parker's total ownership of all major assets, home, savings, and estate accounts. Legally and permanently, the trust cannot be altered without her written and notarized consent. He turned the paper for the guests to see the embossed seal. This is not temporary protection, he added. This is permanence. Nathan's face drained of color. You can't just... Can't? Eleanor's eyes lifted, sharp and precise. Nathan, the word can't stopped applying to me when I stopped asking permission. Across the table, Pat hid a smirk behind her teacup. She didn't need to write anything down. The moment was engraving itself in memory. Lauren reached for her glass, hand trembling. We never wanted your money, Eleanor, she said weakly. We just thought we could help. With new locks, new decor, withdrawals you didn't think I'd see? Eleanor's voice was soft, but the cut was surgical. Help looks different when it's honest. Victor leaned toward Nathan, voice low but firm. You should know something else. Any attempt to dispute or interfere with these documents will immediately trigger the trustee clause. Mrs. Parker's assets would move into a secondary holding, shielded under federal protection. Nathan blinked. Meaning? Meaning, Victor said. That even if you tried to contest it, you'd be contesting against nothing. She's already moved the goalposts. The murmurs around the table deepened, admiration now replacing shock. Someone whispered, She planned this perfectly. Another murmured, Smart woman. Pat folded her arms, satisfaction softening her expression. You've outplayed them, Ellie. Eleanor took a slow breath, her composure crystalline. No, she said, I didn't outplay them. I simply refused to play by their rules. She collected the remaining documents, stacked them neatly, and set them aside. Now, she continued, her tone returning to calm civility. I believe dessert is waiting. Victor leaned close as she poured another cup of tea. You've shifted the room, he whispered. They'll never recover from this one. I don't want them to recover, she replied quietly. I want them to remember. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This isn't right. You're humiliating us. Eleanor turned her gaze to him, unflinching. No, Nathan, you did that yourself. The clock ticked once, loud and clear. Lauren stared at the documents, her face pale and drawn. You really had this all planned, didn't you? Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. I planned peace of mind. The rest planned itself. Pat leaned back, eyes sparkling with awe. You always said the quietest revenge is the most effective. Eleanor smiled faintly, eyes never leaving her son. And the most permanent. The morning after the brunch, the Parker house sat under a heavy hush. The kind of silence that followed a storm, too still, too aware. In the kitchen, the scent of coffee drifted, but no one drank it. Nathan stared at the counter, eyes hollow, while Lauren scrolled through her phone as if searching for a loophole the universe might have missed. Eleanor, however, moved with the quiet precision of someone who'd already turned the page. She sat in her study, sunlight cutting across her desk in clean angles, a cup of black tea cooling beside her. Victor Lane's voice filled the room through the speakerphone. "It's done," he said, the faint shuffle of papers in the background. "All filings are finalized. The county registry has logged the property protections, and the trust modifications are publicly recorded. If anyone tries to challenge them, they'll hit a wall before they even find the courthouse steps." Eleanor leaned back slightly, a faint, satisfied breath leaving her lips. "You've outdone yourself, Victor." "Just following your lead," he replied, and Sophie's verified that every account is layered behind federal protections now. Even if Nathan, or anyone, tries to gain access, the system will flag it as attempted fraud. Eleanor smiled faintly. "It's remarkable how order can rebuild itself once you stop apologizing for keeping it." Across the hall, Pat sat in the parlor, cross-legged in an armchair, her notebook open. She was pretending to read, but her eyes occasionally flicked toward the glass doors. Through them, she could see Nathan pacing the garden, his phone pressed to his ear. His gestures were tight, agitated. Lauren's voice drifted faintly from the porch. "Nathan, stop calling him. You'll just make things worse." "I just want to talk to someone, anyone, who can fix this," he hissed. "She's frozen us out." Lauren rubbed her temples. "She's your mother. There has to be some way." "There isn't," Eleanor said from the doorway. Both turned sharply. She stood framed by the morning light, calm as always, her robe cinched neatly, her expression unyielding. "Whatever you're looking for," she continued, "you won't find it in appeals or loopholes. The paperwork has already spoken." Lauren's voice quivered. "You're really not going to undo this?" Eleanor tilted her head. "You don't undo a boundary. You reinforce it." Nathan stepped closer, his face lined with frustration. "You've made this house a prison." "No," Eleanor said evenly. "I've made it mine again." Behind her, Pat's quiet chuckle broke the tension. "Well said." Nathan exhaled sharply, storming past them toward the driveway. "I need air," he muttered, slamming the door behind him. Lauren sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "I can't live like this." "Then don't," Eleanor said simply. "Choice has always been yours." The conversation ended there. By afternoon, Victor arrived in person, his polished briefcase tucked under one arm. He greeted Eleanor with a respectful nod and took a seat at the kitchen table. "The filings went smoother than expected," he said. "Word travels fast in this town. People talk." Eleanor poured him coffee, calm and unhurried. "Let them. A lesson shared is a lesson multiplied." Pat entered with a knowing smile. "You're trending, Ellie." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Trending?" Pat held up her phone. On the local neighborhood Facebook group, a post from Mrs. Chambers had begun circulating. "Did y'all hear about Eleanor Parker? Outsmarted her own son with legal filings so airtight even the courthouse applauded. A masterclass in grace and boundaries." Eleanor couldn't help the soft laugh that escaped her. "I didn't expect applause." "Oh, you didn't ask for it," Pat said. "But you earned it." Victor sipped his coffee, amused. "You've become a quiet legend, Eleanor. People are calling it the Savannah Stand." Lauren entered the kitchen just in time to hear it, her face drained of color. "They're talking about us?" "About me," Eleanor corrected gently, "and what it means to draw a line and keep it drawn." Lauren's lip trembled, her eyes darting between them. "You've ruined our reputation." Eleanor met her gaze calmly. "Reputation is what you build when people aren't watching. You chose yours." Victor gathered his files and stood. "Mrs. Parker," he said, "your control is absolute. If you'd like, I can send copies of the filings to Nathan for closure." "No," Eleanor said softly. "Let him discover them himself. It's the only way the lesson will stick." Pat's phone chimed again. "Oh, you'll love this," she said, Someone from the local paper wants to interview you for a column on financial independence. They called you the woman who taught Savannah what foresight looks like. Eleanor smiled faintly, the kind of smile that concealed both history and satisfaction. Foresight is just memory-wearing armor. Victor's gaze softened. You've turned the tide, Eleanor. Permanently. Eleanor rose, smoothing her blouse. Not permanently, she said. Just long enough for the right people to remember who they underestimated. Outside, through the kitchen window, Nathan stood motionless by the car, staring at his phone. The message from Victor's office glowed across the screen, confirmation that every legal door had closed. Lauren watched him from the doorway, fear and resentment swirling in her eyes. "What will we do now?" she whispered. Nathan didn't answer. The Parker house was quieter now. Not peaceful, not reconciled, just muted. The air had the stillness of a room where words once cut too deep to fade completely. The public had moved on from the Savannah stand, but within those walls, the echo of it remained. Eleanor sat on the porch that afternoon, a ledger open in her lap, sunlight tracing across the pages. The old oak trees cast shifting shadows over her notes, columns of figures, new allocations, a separate folder marked Future Actions. Pat appeared at the doorway carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. "You're working again," she teased softly. "Do you ever stop?" Eleanor's smile was faint. Work is just thought with purpose. Pat handed her the glass and sat beside her, stretching her legs out. "So, what's today's purpose?" "Clarity," Eleanor said. "They still haven't learned it. I can feel it in the quiet." From inside came the distant hum of conversation, Lauren's voice, brittle and strained, followed by Nathan's, lower but tired. Their arguments had grown smaller, quieter, like waves eroding stone. Guilt had dulled their defiance but hadn't replaced it with understanding. "They're embarrassed," Pat said after a pause. "That's something." "Embarrassment isn't growth," Eleanor replied. "It's just ego bruised into silence." A soft breeze rustled the pages of her ledger. On one sheet, neat handwriting outlined her next plan: new charitable trust, scholarship fund for underfunded teachers in Savannah County. She underlined the word independent. Pat noticed. "You're giving away more?" "Not giving away," Eleanor corrected. "Reassigning, turning neglect into purpose." Pat smiled. "You never stop teaching, do you?" "Only the audience changes," Eleanor murmured. The sound of a car door closing drew their attention. Victor Lane stepped out of his sedan, jacket slung over his arm, and waved as he crossed the walkway. "Ladies," he greeted, voice even as always. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're right on time," Eleanor said, closing the ledger. Pat grinned. "You two and your timing. It's like watching a court rehearsal." Victor took a seat across from Eleanor, setting a folder on the table. "I wanted to confirm what we discussed. All protections remain intact. The filings are now state-verified. Even if someone tried to appeal, it wouldn't pass preliminary review." Eleanor nodded. "Good." Victor hesitated, then leaned slightly closer. "Nathan called my office." Pat's eyebrows lifted. "Oh?" Victor continued. "He asked if there was any way to mediate the situation, to revisit certain terms." Eleanor's expression didn't change. Did he sound remorseful or simply inconvenienced? "A little of both," Victor admitted. "That's progress," Pat offered. Eleanor shook her head. "No, that's self-preservation disguised as humility." She folded her hands neatly on the table. "He still doesn't understand that inheritance is never about money. It's about stewardship." And he mistook ownership for entitlement. Victor regarded her for a moment, quiet admiration flickering across his face. "You know," he said, "I've drafted wills for 100 families. but I've never seen one so deliberate. It's not just protection, it's philosophy. Eleanor smiled. Philosophy is just discipline that's been tested. Inside the house, a door closed softly. Lauren appeared at the window, her expression uncertain. For once, there was no hostility in her eyes, only something like recognition or perhaps exhaustion. She lingered for a moment, then disappeared again. "She's tired," Pat said quietly. "They both are," Eleanor replied. "But fatigue isn't contrition. I'll wait for that." Victor rose, gathering his briefcase. "You've built something unbreakable, Eleanor. They may never admit it, but they'll live better under your rules than they ever did under their own." Pat lifted her glass in a quiet toast. "To structure," she said. Eleanor clinked hers gently against it. "And to consequences." They sat in companionable silence, the cicadas droning in the trees. The evening light deepened, spilling amber across the porch steps. Eleanor watched as Nathan emerged from the side of the house. His shoulders slumped, his movements uncertain. He stopped at the base of the porch, hesitating like a man who no longer knew if he was welcome. "Mom," he said softly, "can we talk?" Eleanor studied him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. "You may," she said finally. He climbed the steps, stopping short of sitting. I I get it now. What you were trying to do." "Do you?" she asked, voice calm but testing. He nodded, though uncertainty lingered in the gesture. "I know I was wrong. I don't know how to fix it." Eleanor looked toward the street where the lamplight began to glow. "You don't fix trust," she said quietly. "You rebuild it, brick by brick. And that takes more than apology." Nathan nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling into him. "I'll try." "I know," she said, "but effort is the beginning, not the conclusion." Pat gave Eleanor a discreet look of approval. "Still the teacher," she whispered. Victor smiled faintly, "and still in control." Eleanor rose, smoothing her cardigan. "Control isn't about power," she said. "It's about peace. And peace requires discipline." She turned toward the front door, pausing only once before stepping inside. Pat leaned back, exhaling. "You think he learned the lesson?" Eleanor's voice floated back through the doorway, low and resolute. "Not yet. But the semester isn't over." The following week brought an early hint of autumn to Savannah, the kind that carried both crisp air and quiet revelation. The Parker home, once a site of tension and unraveling loyalties, now buzzed softly with a new rhythm. Eleanor had risen before sunrise, brewed her coffee, and opened her ledger beneath the faint light of dawn. Her pen moved steadily across the page, the line items of a new plan taking shape. By mid-morning, the smell of baked pecans filled the house. Pat arrived right on time, balancing a bakery box and curiosity. "You've got that look again," she said, setting the box down. "The one that means you're 3 steps ahead of everyone else." Eleanor smiled faintly, slipping a thin folder across the table. 4 steps, actually. Pat opened it and blinked. "The Eleanor Parker Education Trust?" Eleanor nodded. "A scholarship program for Savannah County public school teachers. Funding will come from my discretionary account, 15% of the estate." Pat whistled under her breath. "You're not just teaching lessons anymore, Ellie. You're rewriting curriculums." "I spent 40 years teaching others to find purpose," Eleanor said. "Now I'm ensuring mine doesn't die in a bank ledger." She sipped her coffee, her voice even but deliberate. "Nathan and Lauren will learn about it through the papers, not before." Pat's grin turned sharp. "Ouch." "Elegant, though." Eleanor shrugged lightly. "Elegance is just clarity without apology." At 11, Victor Lane arrived with his ever-present briefcase. "Morning, ladies," he said, setting it beside him. You've kept me busier than the courthouse this month. Eleanor motioned him to sit. Let's finalize it. Victor withdrew a stack of documents, formal, clean, ready. This foundation will operate independently, with you as founder and sole trustee. The funds transfer today. And before you ask, yes, Nathan and Lauren have no access or authority. Pat chuckled. That should ruin their lunch? Victor smiled. It already did. Lauren called my office yesterday, asking about potential family clauses. I told her there were none. Eleanor's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. I don't resent their ambition, only their presumption. Victor nodded. You're protecting something bigger now. Legacy. Outside, the first few guests began to arrive. Neighbors, former students, and community members Eleanor had quietly invited under the pretense of an afternoon tea. The dining table had been reset. Fine china, linen napkins, sunlight filtering through lace curtains. Nathan and Lauren entered last, their demeanor cautious, uncertain. They hadn't been told the reason for the gathering, only that Eleanor had something to share. Mom, Nathan greeted quietly. You look, well? I am, Eleanor said simply, and I hope you're ready to listen. She gestured toward Victor, who stood at her side like a quiet sentinel. As of this morning, I've established a permanent education trust, she announced. Funds have already been transferred. It will support teachers in this county, those who work tirelessly and retire with too little to show for it. The room buzzed. Admiration, surprise, a few murmured wows. Pat caught the flicker of disbelief in Lauren's face. That's incredible, Mrs. Parker, one of the guests said. Such foresight. Lauren's polite smile wavered. 15%, you said? Eleanor turned toward her, her voice cool and steady. It was an investment, not a loss. Victor cleared his throat. For full transparency, he said, Mrs. Parker's legal protections remain unchanged. This trust exists outside her family holdings. Its management is irrevocable and shielded by federal statutes. Nathan's shoulders sagged slightly. He tried to mask it, but the truth landed like a quiet verdict. Another door closed. You're giving it all away, Lauren said, disbelief edging into her tone. Not all, Eleanor replied, just enough to ensure what matters lasts longer than disappointment. Pat, seated near the back, watched Eleanor closely. There was no gloating in her friend's posture, just composure. Victory, quiet and deliberate, was never loud in Eleanor's hands. As the gathering continued, guests circled around Eleanor, thanking her, offering stories of classrooms changed by her mentorship. She listened, smiling softly, letting the warmth fill spaces where resentment used to live. When the last guest departed, only Pat, Victor, and the two Parkers remained. Nathan lingered near the doorway, expression unreadable. Mom, he began, voice low, I don't know what to say. Eleanor gathered the remaining documents, tucking them neatly into her leather case. You could start, she said gently, by meaning it. Lauren crossed her arms. This isn't fair. Eleanor looked up, calm and unshaken. Fairness is an illusion, Lauren. I prefer balance, and I've achieved it. Victor stood, buttoning his jacket. Mrs. Parker, everything is official. The trust will be announced publicly tomorrow. Savannah will be talking about it by noon. Pat grinned. You've done it again. Eleanor smiled faintly, closing the ledger. No, she said. I've just finished the lesson. Nathan hesitated. And what lesson is that? She looked at him for a long, steady moment. That legacy isn't inherited. It's earned. By the following weekend, Eleanor Parker's name had taken on a quiet, startling power in Savannah. Not the kind drawn from gossip or spectacle, but from respect. The Savannah Chronicle had run a front-page feature on her newly formed education trust, calling it a masterclass in foresight and grace. The community had responded in kind. Flowers arrived daily, handwritten letters from former students and fellow teachers, thank you cards addressed simply to Mrs. Parker, the woman who saw everything coming. In the dining room, sunlight poured across the long oak table. Eleanor sorted through the letters one by one, each line a gentle reminder that her patience had ripened into legacy. Pat sat across from her, sipping coffee, amusement flickering in her eyes. "You realize you're officially famous, right?" Pat said. "The Chronicle can't stop writing about you. Facebook, the neighborhood group, even the PTA. Everyone's quoting your lines about balance and stewardship. You're like the town philosopher." Eleanor smiled faintly. Philosophy is what people call discipline when they envy its results. Pat laughed, setting down her mug. "I'm stealing that one." In the corner, a vase overflowed with lilies and notes. One stood out, simple white stationery embossed with a school crest. The note read, "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. Your gift will send two of us to graduate school this fall. We'll make you proud." Eleanor ran a hand over the paper, her expression softening. "That," she said quietly, "is what money was meant to do. Not divide. Build." Through the window, she could see Nathan in the yard, trimming the hedges in silence. He'd been oddly diligent since the public announcement. Less bluster, more presence. Lauren, on the other hand, had retreated inward. Her car stayed parked, her social calls vanished, her laughter gone. The local whispers had reached her too, though not in admiration. At the kitchen doorway, Victor Lane stepped in, adjusting his tie. "Morning, Eleanor, Pat." "Victor," Eleanor said warmly, "punctual as always." He smiled. "It's my curse. I have updates." He placed a thin stack of documents on the table, the crisp sound cutting through the soft hum of the ceiling fan. "All account audits and estate protections have been verified. The education trust is self-sustaining, the transfers irreversible. Your financial landscape," he said with measured satisfaction, "is airtight." Pat clapped lightly. "There it is. Music to a planner's ears." Victor nodded toward Eleanor. "And, Mrs. Parker, your influence extends further than you think. The State Education Board reached out this morning. They want to partner with the foundation to expand it regionally. Your name carries weight now." Eleanor's smile was small but genuine. "Then let them use it, as long as it helps someone who earns it." Across the hall, the sound of footsteps echoed. Nathan appeared, hesitating at the doorway. "I saw the article," he said quietly. "The Chronicle called you a pillar of ethical resolve." Eleanor looked up, expression unreadable. "They did." He shifted awkwardly. "It's impressive." "Impressive?" Pat echoed, a hint of teasing. "Try monumental, Nathan." He forced a small smile. "I just didn't realize how far this would go." Eleanor's tone was gentle but firm. "That's the difference between intent and impact, Nathan. One you control. The other defines you." Lauren appeared behind him, her face pale, her voice subdued. "Everyone's talking about you, Eleanor. I can't even walk into the cafe without hearing your name." Eleanor didn't rise to the bait. "Then perhaps you should start listening to what they're saying." Lauren's eyes narrowed slightly, her pride still flickering like a candle refusing to go out. But she said nothing. Victor cleared his throat. "I also wanted to mention, there's been media interest beyond the Chronicle. Southern Life magazine reached out. They want to run a feature on your story, a profile about independence, integrity, and modern legacy management." Pat's eyebrows shot up. "You're about to be the face of strategic revenge, Ellie." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Let's call it correction through preparation." Victor handed her a letter with the magazine's official letterhead. They're requesting an interview next week. They want to frame it as the teacher who outsmarted her own test. Eleanor read the first paragraph in silence, her reflection caught in the window, steady, older, sharper than she remembered. For the first time in a long while, she didn't see someone defending herself. She saw someone directing the narrative. Pat leaned over. "You'll do it, won't you?" Eleanor folded the letter neatly. "Perhaps," she said, "but not for recognition. For record. People forget too quickly who writes the story and who edits it." Outside, the mail truck pulled up. Nathan stepped forward to take the bundle from the driver, but the man smiled and waved him off. "Sorry, sir. These are addressed to Mrs. Eleanor Parker. Strictly personal." Pat smirked. "Well, fame looks good on you." "It's not fame," Eleanor said softly. "It's consequence properly organized." The afternoon stretched into gold light as Victor gathered his papers and left. Pat lingered, tidying cups. Nathan and Lauren disappeared upstairs without a word. When the door finally closed, Eleanor sat alone in the quiet house. The echo of her own calm filled the room, a piece not of surrender, but of design. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line beneath her list of completed tasks: legacy, secured. Lesson, ongoing. Then her phone buzzed. A new email notification. From Marjorie Hollis, Senior Editor, Southern Life Magazine. Subject, feature request, Eleanor Parker, the woman who redefined control. At the bottom, a note read, "We'd like to include the perspective of your son and daughter-in-law, if they're willing." Eleanor's eyes lingered on the line. A slow smile formed. "Now," she whispered, closing the notebook. "That should make for an interesting interview." Sunday arrived with the kind of sunlight that made the world look cleaner than it was. The Parker house, once a stage for tension and deception, now hummed with stillness. Outside, the azaleas were in bloom again, soft bursts of pink and white spilling across the garden Eleanor had tended for decades. She sat by the bay window with a book in her lap, unread. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, and the faint scent of chamomile drifted from the teapot Pat had left steeping nearby. For the first time in months, Eleanor allowed herself to simply exist in the quiet she'd earned. From upstairs came the muffled sounds of movement, Nathan's careful footsteps, Lauren's restless pacing. They hadn't left the house much since the Chronicle article. Every errand brought glances, whispers, that subtle tilt of sympathy that stung worse than accusation. Pat appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray with 2 cups and a plate of lemon shortbread. "You've officially got the calmest house in Savannah," she said, settling across from Eleanor. "It's eerie." Eleanor smiled faintly. Peace always sounds eerie to those who live on noise. Pat poured the tea, her eyes dancing. "I like this new routine of yours. Tea, sunlight, community legend status." Eleanor chuckled softly. "Legends are for people who stop learning. I'm still observing." "Observing what?" Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the stairs. "Patterns. Always patterns." Pat followed her look, understanding without needing words. "They're still sulking." "Sulking requires self-awareness," Eleanor said. "This is something closer to quiet panic." They sipped their tea in companionable silence. Outside, the gate creaked open. 2 neighbors approached carrying flowers. Eleanor recognized them instantly, the Hendersons from down the street, both former colleagues from her years teaching English at Savannah High. "Afternoon, Ellie," Mr. Henderson called warmly. "We just wanted to stop by and say congratulations. That article in Southern Life? Brilliant." Pat grinned. "The legend grows." Eleanor rose gracefully to greet them, accepting the bouquet with genuine warmth. "You didn't have to." "Oh, we insisted," Mrs. Henderson said. "It's rare to see someone stand their ground with such elegance. The whole neighborhood's still talking about it." Eleanor thanked them, offered tea, and ushered them into the parlor. Within minutes, conversation bloomed as easily as the flowers, shared memories of classrooms, old board meetings, stories of stubborn students turned success stories. From the hallway, Nathan lingered just beyond view, listening. Each laugh, each note of admiration, cut sharper than any argument. Lauren appeared behind him, arms crossed, her face pale. "They're here to worship her," she muttered. Nathan's jaw tightened. They always did. In the parlor, the talk turned practical. Mr. Henderson leaned forward. "So, Ellie, what's next? You've inspired half the faculty board. Someone said you're starting a mentorship fund?" Eleanor's eyes softened. "Something like that. I've been considering a literary grant for teachers who write in their spare time. There's brilliance sitting in those classrooms with no time to grow." Pat smiled. "You're basically Savannah's quiet philanthropist now." Eleanor's expression turned reflective. "It's not philanthropy, Pat. It's course correction. I've seen what happens when people misuse what they're given. Money, trust, time. I'm just redirecting energy where it belongs." Victor arrived moments later, ever punctual, his polished shoes whispering against the tile. "Mrs. Parker," he said with a courteous nod, "I wanted to bring by the finalized filings for your next charitable allocation. The trust expansions are approved and locked." Eleanor gestured toward the coffee table. "Set them there, please." He did, and then smiled faintly. "I also wanted to let you know. The Foundation's first 2 scholarship recipients have been selected. You'll like them. Both are children of your former students." Something in Eleanor's expression shifted. Soft pride, tempered by restraint. "Then the circle is complete," she said quietly. Pat leaned toward Victor. "You realize she's untouchable now, right? Legally, socially, philosophically." Victor's laugh was brief but warm. "It's true. I've seen judges with less composure than Mrs. Parker." Eleanor lifted her cup. "Control is simply what remains after truth settles." The room fell into a serene hush. Through the open window, cicadas began their slow afternoon chorus. The sunlight touched everything. Her silver hair, the tidy rows of books, the neatly stacked folders that held her empire of foresight. Nathan appeared at the doorway then, his hesitation palpable. "Mom," he said softly. Eleanor turned her head slightly but didn't rise. "Yes? I just wanted to say, congratulations." His tone was thin, unsteady. A truce offered more from exhaustion than sincerity. Eleanor nodded once. "Thank you, Nathan. I trust you mean it this time." He hesitated, then retreated without another word. Pat exhaled. "You think he does?" Eleanor looked back to her tea. "He'll learn. Eventually. Entitlement is a habit, not a flaw. Habits take time to break." Victor began packing his briefcase, careful not to disturb the calm. "Everything remains in perfect order, Eleanor. You're free to rest now." Eleanor tilted her head. "Rest is for completion. I prefer continuity." Pat smiled. "Which means?" Eleanor reached for a new folder from the sideboard. "Which means I'm setting aside another 5% for the Arts Council. Savannah's painters deserve to eat too." Pat laughed. "You're unstoppable." "Predictable," Eleanor corrected, "and predictability is power." The conversation ebbed into the kind of silence that feels like the end of a chapter. Even Victor seemed reluctant to leave, as though aware he was witnessing something quietly historic, the moment a woman's restraint became her legacy. As he stepped out, he paused at the doorway. "Eleanor," he said softly, "you've built peace so thoroughly that it frightens people who can't find it." She smiled. "That's because they mistake peace for surrender." When the last guest had gone, Eleanor lingered by the window once more, watching the light fade into soft amber. The street outside glowed with the early hush of evening, calm and reverent. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from Sophie Kim. Sophie, Mrs. Parker, small anomaly detected. Someone's been accessing your network again. Same alias as before. L. Green. It's escalating. Eleanor set down her cup slowly, her reflection calm in the window pane. Of course it is, she whispered. She stood, gathering her folders with the precision of someone preparing for class. Then the next lesson, she murmured, will be public. The morning broke cool and bright, the kind of Savannah day that smelled faintly of magnolia and second chances. The Parker home was quiet, too quiet. Upstairs, faint footsteps creaked across the hall, followed by the sound of a door closing. Eleanor didn't look up. She was seated at the dining table, her open notebook surrounded by tidy stacks of documents, handwritten notes, and a steaming cup of black tea. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately, like someone recording the end of a long experiment. Final observation log. She wrote across the top of a fresh page. Subject: Family Dynamics, Parker Household. Conclusion: Entitlement requires opportunity. Remove the opportunity, and the lesson begins. She paused, letting the ink dry, then turned to the next page filled with her own annotations. Every date since her quiet return was listed with precision: actions, reactions, adjustments. Nathan's tentative apologies, Lauren's simmering resentment, Pat's watchful encouragement, Victor's legal confirmations. Each entry formed a map of human behavior she could now read like literature. Outside, the world was finally catching up to her calm. The newspaper lay folded on the counter, another feature headlined, Eleanor Parker's Legacy Expands, a Lesson in Quiet Power. Eleanor glanced at it briefly before returning to her notes. Quiet power, she murmured. They finally understand the difference between sound and strength. Pat arrived mid-morning, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. She didn't knock anymore. She didn't need to. Morning, Professor, she teased softly, setting a small paper bag on the table. Blueberry scones from the cafe. You've earned them. Eleanor smiled faintly, setting down her pen. Earned, not owed. A distinction my household is still learning. Pat slid into the chair across from her, scanning the neat stacks of paper. Is this the book or the confession? The record, Eleanor said. I kept notes from the start. Patterns, observations, outcomes. It's all here now. Every lesson completed. Pat's eyes softened. You're something else, Ellie. Just thorough, Eleanor said, though her expression betrayed quiet satisfaction. Victor arrived not long after, his usual briefcase in hand. He placed it beside her notebook and nodded respectfully. Mrs. Parker, he began, as of this morning, every clause in your estate filings has passed verification. The trust, the foundation, the asset transfers, all are permanently protected. Even I can't change them now. Eleanor's smile deepened, the quiet kind that never reached her eyes but burned with certainty. Perfect. Victor's tone softened. You've done more than secure your estate, Eleanor. You've built permanence out of betrayal. Pat grinned, and made it look effortless. Eleanor glanced toward the staircase. Effortless is the reward for preparation. At that moment, Nathan and Lauren appeared at the top of the stairs, standing together but looking apart. The exhaustion in their faces said more than words could. Lauren held a phone in her hand, the glow of the screen washing her features in pale blue light. Mom, Nathan said quietly, we need to talk. Eleanor didn't move. About the network breach? Lauren stiffened. You know? Of course, Eleanor said calmly, closing her notebook. Sophie alerted me. L. Green wasn't subtle. Lauren's throat tightened. It was just curiosity. Curiosity? Eleanor said, is admirable when it seeks understanding, dangerous when it seeks advantage. Nathan's voice broke the silence. She didn't mean harm. We just wanted to see if the accounts still belong to me? Eleanor finished for him. They do. Every last one. Victor cleared his throat. Mrs. Parker, I can confirm that any attempts to access the trust triggered security protocols. It's handled. Legally, the matter is closed. Lauren looked away, shame tightening her features. Nathan, however, stayed rooted in place. I understand now, he said quietly. You weren't trying to punish us. You were trying to prove something. Eleanor regarded him with that same quiet steadiness that had defined her every move. I wasn't proving anything, Nathan. I was documenting. Observation is proof enough. Pat leaned back, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Seems like class is dismissed. Eleanor stood, smoothing the front of her blouse, her gaze unwavering. No, she said. The final exam is just beginning. She walked to the parlor window, the soft light falling over her shoulders. Outside, several cars had slowed along the curb. Strangers were pausing to take photos of her home, the house that had become a symbol of dignity reclaimed. Pat joined her, watching as one woman pointed toward the porch with admiration. You realize people will study you one day, she said. Eleanor chuckled quietly. Let them. Every lesson needs a case study. Behind them, Nathan and Lauren stood silent, their reflections caught faintly in the glass, a reminder of what happens when comfort mistakes itself for power. Victor gathered his files. Everything's locked, Eleanor. Permanently. She nodded. Then I'm free to begin again? Pat arched a brow. Begin what? Eleanor turned from the window, her expression unreadable but certain. The Parker Initiative. Financial literacy workshops for women who've been misled into dependence. If you can't fix entitlement, you can prevent it. Pat grinned. You're unstoppable. Eleanor met her gaze evenly. No, just consistent. The room filled again with the soft hum of security, the ticking clock, the rustle of papers, the distant cicadas outside. Eleanor sat back down, opened her notebook, and drew a final line beneath her last entry. Observation complete. Stability achieved. Pat raised her teacup in salute. To victory, she said softly. Eleanor's eyes lingered on her son and daughter-in-law, who stood uncertainly in the doorway, humbled but not yet healed. No, she said, her voice calm and final. To understanding. The evening felt heavier than it should have. A storm had brushed through Savannah earlier that day, leaving the air thick and electric. By the time the guests arrived, the Parker house was glowing. Soft lamplight spilling across the dining room walls, silverware polished to a mirror finish. Eleanor had arranged every detail herself. At the head of the long table, she sat poised in her navy dress, pearls at her throat, her expression composed but unyielding. Pat sat to her right, eyes gleaming with quiet anticipation. Victor Lane occupied the seat to her left, his briefcase resting against the chair leg, a lawyer's constant shadow. Nathan and Lauren entered last. Both were neatly dressed, both visibly uneasy. The room's atmosphere made that unavoidable. There was calm, but it was the kind that felt watched. Evening, Mom, Nathan said, his voice thin. Eleanor gestured toward the empty chairs across from her. Sit. It's time we finish what we started. They obeyed. The room fell silent except for the faint clinking of glasses as Pat poured tea for everyone. Outside, thunder rolled again in the distance, low and slow. Eleanor waited until the quiet was perfect before she began. You've all read the stories, she said, her voice steady. You've all seen the praise, the interviews, the photographs. But what you haven't seen, what no one has seen, is the record. Lauren frowned slightly. Record? Eleanor reached into the leather folder beside her and placed a bound notebook on the table. The same one she'd written in for months. Its edges worn, its pages filled with careful handwriting. "This," she said, her fingers resting lightly on the cover, "is everything I observed since the day I told you I was traveling for rest. Every word, every transaction, every choice. Your choices." Nathan's jaw tightened. "You were spying on us." "I was watching you," Eleanor corrected. "A mother watches when words stop working. A teacher observes when lessons go ignored." Pat's smile was subtle, approving. "And she's very thorough." Eleanor opened the notebook. "May I?" she asked, though it wasn't a question. She began to read, not loudly, not accusingly, but with the quiet authority of someone whose truth no longer required emotion to validate it. March 4th, Lauren removes family photographs from mantle, remarks that the house needs to feel more theirs. Nathan does not object. Nathan shifted in his chair, but Eleanor continued. March 7th, joint expense card used for home decor purchase. Unauthorized. Amount, $712. Follow-up confirmed via bank alert. Victor nodded faintly, flipping through a separate folder. Documented and legally neutralized, he confirmed. Lauren's face flushed red. "This is accurate," Eleanor interrupted. "And complete." She turned another page. March 11th, discussion overheard through camera audio. "Once she's gone, we'll remodel." The silence after that was deeper than shame. Nathan finally exhaled. "We were stupid. I was stupid. I thought you'd never notice." Eleanor's gaze softened slightly. "You underestimated observation, Nathan. I notice what people hide behind comfort." Across the table, Pat lifted her teacup and clinked it gently against her saucer. "Cheers to that." Eleanor closed the notebook with finality. "You see, I didn't come back to punish you. I came back to understand you. And what I learned," she said, eyes steady, "is that character reveals itself when it thinks it's unobserved." Lauren's voice trembled. "So what happens now? Are you going to expose us?" Eleanor smiled faintly. "There's nothing left to expose. You've already done that yourselves, and I have no interest in humiliation, only in acknowledgement." Victor leaned forward. "For the record, Mrs. Parker's holdings remain protected. The trust, the foundation, the estate, permanent and untouchable. There's nothing left for anyone to fix." Nathan nodded slowly, defeated. "We know." Pat looked between them, then at Eleanor. "So this is the end?" Eleanor glanced down at her folded hands. "The end of deception, yes, but not of observation." The words hung in the air, calm yet final. Across the table, Nathan's eyes glistened. "I never meant to—" Eleanor stopped him with a quiet gesture. "Intent matters less than awareness. You've both been forced to see what I've always seen." Lauren swallowed hard. "Which is?" Eleanor met her gaze without flinching. "That truth has patience. It waits for people to catch up." For a long moment, no one spoke. The storm outside had rolled closer now, rain tapping lightly against the windows. Then, slowly, Victor raised his glass. "To patience, then," he said softly. Pat followed. "And to power well earned." Eleanor's eyes glimmered in the candlelight as she lifted her own cup. "To understanding," she said. The four of them clinked their glasses gently. Outside, the rain thickened, blurring the garden lights into halos of gold. Inside, the air carried something like reverence, the stillness of equilibrium finally restored. Nathan stared at his mother, and for the first time, he didn't see the woman who'd raised him or the one he'd tried to outmaneuver. He saw what Savannah had already named her, a strategist cloaked in grace. Lauren's voice broke the quiet. "You really watched everything?" Eleanor nodded. "Everything that mattered." Victor leaned back, satisfied. Then this chapter, Mrs. Parker, is officially closed. Eleanor gave a small, serene smile. Chapters close themselves when the truth finishes speaking. Pat reached across the table, touching Eleanor's hand lightly. You won, Ellie. Eleanor shook her head. No, I taught. She rose slowly, moving toward the window, watching as lightning flashed far beyond the oaks. Her reflection in the glass was sharp and sure, the image of a woman who had reclaimed her own narrative and written it down for the world to see. Turning back toward the table, she let her final words fall with quiet certainty. I told my family I was traveling for rest. When I returned quietly, I saw their truth, and they finally understood mine.